Hello, everybody. I'm Bernie Goldberg, and this is the No BS Zone. I'm here with the Renaissance man of the Rockies, my good friend John Daly. How are you, John?
I'm doing good, Bernie. I just got back from Washington, D.C. a few days ago and had a good trip out there.
Washington, D.C. Was it the safest place that you've ever been to? The safest city in America?
Well, so I should say I flew into D.C. Didn't see any problems. I didn't get mugged. Didn't see anybody get mugged. Then I took an Uber down to National Harbor for the principal's first event down there. Seemed very safe down there, but I know that's not the same as Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm glad you made it back in one piece in any event. This is the post State of the Union address, No BS Zone. It's difficult to recap an hour and 48 minutes, which is how long it went. It was the longest State of the Union speech on record. So we're just going to bounce around to highlights and lowlights, if that's okay with everybody. Let me start. This is a political event, and the idea here was to turn Donald Trump's low standings with the American people, to turn it around. Let me just give you very few numbers. His CNN poll came out a few days ago, and his approval rating was 36%. Let's assume the average is a little higher than that, 41%, but that's still way underwater. 82% of Republicans support him, but that's not as good as it sounds. 82% is an indication that he's lost some Republican support. And if the midterms are just over the horizon, this speech was a prelude to the midterms. 82% is not a good number. But only the worst number is only 26% of independents support the president. So this speech, as I say, was an attempt to turn things around. Whether he did or not, we'll know in a few days. Just a few points. Affordability, which is a big issue for voters. He said, affordability is a dirty, rotten lie perpetuated by Democrats. I'm not sure that was a brilliant idea. He at one point, it was a political speech, but it was like a TV show is what it was, with one special guest after another. He brought in the U.S. Olympic gold medal team. Everybody stood up, even the Democrats stood up and applauded. And he wrapped himself in their glory. Understandably, he gave a Medal of Honor, a Congressional Medal of Honor, to a young soldier who was shot in Venezuela. He gave a Congressional Medal of Honor to a 100-year-old Navy airman. It was one guest after another that you had to stand and applaud for. Even Democrats had to stand and applaud for many of them. At one point, Donald Trump said, and this was an important point, he said, stand up if you believe the first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Every Republican stood up, of course. Most Democrats didn't. So he called them, basically, he said, they're unpatriotic and crazy. That was a message, that Democrats were unpatriotic and crazy. I think he'll get a bump in the polls. I think that'll come. I don't know how long it'll last, but I think he'll get a bump in the polls. I think it played well with Republicans. I don't know how it played with the American public, the broader American public. I'm not going to try to make a prediction on that. We'll see in a few days. But if he doesn't turn independents around, he'll get some of those Republicans he lost back. But he also lost Latino voters and Black voters who supported him in 2024. He lost them, according to the CNN poll. If he doesn't get them back with this speech and what follows the speech in the weeks and months ahead, Republicans are going to have a very bad November. They're just going to have a very bad November. And whether this speech turned things around, we'll know soon enough. John, your take on this?
Yeah, I think you set the table right there at the beginning about how poor Trump's poll numbers have been. not just his approval rating, but also on the individual policies and issues that he did rank quite well on, not that long ago. So, and some of the polls that I think are particularly devastating, we've had, I think, at least 3 major ones lately that have shown that Americans thought Biden was a better president than Trump has been in the second term. I can't even imagine how mad that made Trump to hear that, because that's pretty brutal. I mean, Biden was not a popular president. So you're right. Trump had this opportunity at the State of the Union, which is typically watched by about 10% of Americans. I mean, a good number, but not a huge portion. He had this opportunity to try and assure the country that things are either better than they think, or that they're getting better. And from what I saw, I mentioned to you before it went on, I skipped over a lot of the State of the Union, kind of looked at the highlights, because I mean, it was very long. Those are very hard for me to watch anyway. But I don't think he was very effective at it. He said a lot of things that he always says, the same taglines about this being the golden age, did a lot of gaslighting, said a lot of things that weren't true. But what stuck out for me the most was that he came across so tired at times. And it's just, I think this has probably been a gradual thing, and I haven't paid as close attention to his public appearances as I previously had. But just, old and tired, and he's an older man. But yeah, I don't think he did much to get Americans excited about the state of things right now and where they're headed. But yeah, I will say, you might be right that he might get a little bit of a bump in the polls. I think that's probably traditional. I don't think it'll last very long, just based on everything else. So we'll have to see where things go from here.
I should make clear that normally I would rather be waterboarded than watch the State of the Union address, and I wouldn't have watched it last night. I can't watch it. Every 10 seconds, half the chamber stands up and applauds, and the other half sits on their hands. Last night it was the Democrats, of course, that didn't get up and applaud. Donald Trump could have said, "I'm in favor of apple pie, hot dogs, and baseball on the 4th of July," and the Democrats would not have stood up and applauded. I mean, that's how partisan we've gotten. Now, the only reason I watched, instead of being waterboarded, I had the option, by the way. The only reason I watched was because here we are doing this analysis, on the day after. But if we weren't doing an OBS zone today on Wednesday, we'd be talking about something else, because I wouldn't have watched it. Anyway, let's move on. Sort of move on. Before he spoke, Donald Trump shook the hands of the Supreme Court justices. Now, these are the same Supreme Court justices who, a few days later, after they ruled against him in the tariff issue, he suggested they were disloyal to the country, they were under the sway of other nations, they were fools and lapdogs. He said he's ashamed of the justices who voted against him. He called the liberal justices a disgrace. And he said of the 2 justices he appointed, they were a disgrace to their families.
I'm sure their families were very attached to those tariffs, Bernie.
As I was reading it, I almost smiled also. But the Wall Street Journal, and they made a good point, said this was the lowest point of his presidency. You can say, I think they made a bad decision. But when you go after the justices personally, that's just wrong. That just debases the presidency. It calls into legitimacy the court, which Democrats have called in the court's legitimacy into question also. So they don't have clean hands on this. But it's just plain wrong. And he does things like that are just plain wrong. And somebody suggested he could go down as a great president for his accomplishments. And he has had significant accomplishments. But in my view, he'll never be considered a great president, because a great president doesn't call his opponents losers and scum and despicable. You just disagree with what they're saying, with their policies, but you don't go after them personally. A great president doesn't. and that's why he'll never go down as a great president. I know he'd like to be on Mount Rushmore, and I mean that literally, but it ain't going to happen for many reasons.
Yeah, I think that's true. You might remember, Bernie, that President Obama many years ago called out the Supreme
Yes.
Court for a decision. It was at the State of the Union, actually, for a decision he didn't like.
But he didn't call them names.
That's exactly right. And I only brought that up because conservatives like me felt what he did at the time was totally inappropriate, and because it was. And that was nothing compared to what Trump did to the Supreme Court last week after that ruling. His rant, it was deranged, fulfilled with conspiracies. He tried to tie those justices to like foreign interests, the personal attacks on their family. I thought it was extraordinarily stupid. And the problem again is that Trump, he believes he is entitled as president to do whatever he wants, regardless of the Constitution, regardless of the separation of powers, regardless of the law. And whenever he doesn't get what he wants, he lashes out like an angry child would. We've seen this time after time. And now, from what I understand, it sounds weird. I'll give him credit for not doing this during the State of the Union, but not really that much credit. I mean, that's something we should just expect, from our presidents.
That's a pretty low bar.
It is, and that's the thing. I mean, when you're fishing for, to give compliments to Donald Trump on how he handles himself, his decorum, you do have to drop the bar pretty low, because he has set it low for himself, and a lot of his supporters are fine keeping it that low. But I would like to see a return to normalcy. I would like to see respect for the other branches of our government, but I don't think that'll be happening anytime soon.
One more thing before we move on, and going back to the State of the Union. Tell me, I know you didn't watch the whole thing. I did, and I'm sorry. I'm talking now to our audience. I want you to appreciate the fact that I could have been waterboarded and had a perfectly lovely evening, but I watched the whole thing so I could try to make some sense of it with you.
Bernie sacrifices for all of you, just so you understand that.
The thing I missed was he never said anything like, this is a cliche, so forgive me, I feel your pain. He on affordability, as I said earlier, he said it was a dirty lie perpetuated by Democrats. That's not going to sit well, I don't think. But also, why didn't he, and I'm going to give you an answer, but why didn't he say, we made a lot of progress. We got inflation down. We got some prices down. Stock market is doing well. So if you have a pension plan, you're probably doing well. But we have a long way to go, and I'm here to tell you that I'm going to spend every minute of every day trying to make life better for you. I feel your pain. The equivalent. Right. You know why he didn't do that, John?
I do, yeah.
Because he's incapable of doing it.
Right.
He's incapable. He's not making a political decision. He's just incapable of saying something like, I feel your pain. That may have gone a long way yesterday. Anyway, you want to say something?
Can I add something to that real quick, Bernie? So Biden was guilty of this too. I mean, he was always out there hyping how good things were under him and sort of ignoring the inflation problem that was really bad at least through most of his presidency. I think he was more in denial, or maybe just didn't understand the issue. But yeah, I think he could have helped himself out a lot at the time if he had done exactly what you're describing. Say, hey, we know this is a problem. I will say that we are recovering from this pandemic faster than anybody else in the world, despite, these high prices now. We're working on that. But he didn't do that. Inflation was finally down to a little under 3.0 by the time he left office, which is decent. But throughout it was very high for a very long time, and he didn't treat it like it was. At least the way.
Why do you think, John, he didn't say what you think and what I think he should have said?
I think he was clueless. I think he was clueless through much of his presidency. He did have some economic numbers that were doing well, but not the inflation ones. But he probably lacked that empathy for struggling Americans, as the president of the United States. I don't think that's the same case with Trump. Like you said, I think Trump he likes to be celebrated. He likes to say things are awesome. Everything he touches is awesome. And he won't acknowledge otherwise unless he's, trying to blame something on his predecessor. But yeah, it's I think Biden was clueless. I think Trump just is about self-celebration, and both I think are made very bad political moves on this front.
This, as I said earlier, was an important step along the road to the midterms. You've said something several times. I just want to take a short minute or so for you to say it again. That you don't think Donald Trump cares about the results of the midterms.
Right. I don't believe he cares about that.
I find hard to believe, because if the Democrats win the House, Donald Trump's presidency is effectively over. There will be investigations coming out the wazoo of Republicans. There will be impeachments of Kristi Noem, God knows who else in his administration, and eventually Donald Trump. How could he not care about the results of the midterms, John?
I think he just looks at Congress as a bunch of impotent peons who if he can do stuff through executive power, which is what he's been doing this entire second term, he doesn't see a use for Congress. And do I think he would prefer not to be impeached over being impeached? Yeah, probably. But I don't think he minds that much being impeached. I think he likes, I've said this, I made this point many times, but he likes having this Democratic foil. It hasn't been as conceivable, in his first, year in office, because the Republicans hold all the majority, so he has to sort of blame the outlier Republicans who sort of stick up to him once in a while, which is very rare. But yeah, I think he sort of likes having this. He loves being the victim. He loves being, having this persecution complex where the other side is getting in his way. But I don't think, I think they probably will. The Democrats probably will impeach him. The Senate will not convict, and it'll be completely pointless. I don't think he'll benefit from it politically. I'm not sure he'll be hurt by it politically. All this that's going to happen here. So yeah, he's just going to keep testing what he can do with executive powers, as he is with tariffs. The Supreme Court ruled against him. They showed they correctly determined that this was unconstitutional, what Trump did. So now he's looking for other ways to circumvent the law and use his power to try and get tariffs to stay in place, and that's going to be a whole nother legal battle. So
let's take a big U-turn into the Persian Gulf and talk about Iran. The president at the State of the Union mentioned Iran and said they could never have a nuclear weapon. That we expected that, and good for him for saying that.
Right.
I'm going to keep my analysis of Iran brief, and then I'm going to throw to you, John. And here's my brief analysis. You don't send 10,000 ships. Okay, it's not 10,000, but he's got.
It's like what?
he's got an armada of battleships and a couple of aircraft carriers and a whole bunch of jet planes loaded with bombs and all that. You don't send all that off the shore of Iran to not do anything with them.
Right.
In other words, unless he gets an agreement out of Iran that is backed up by something more than the mullah saying, yeah, we agree not to do this, or he can't just say, oops, and turn all that around. It's going to look like he drew that bright line and then they crossed it and he didn't do anything about it. So I can't help but thinking missiles are going to be flying any day now. I could be wrong. And maybe that may be a very good thing to do. I want to make that clear, but I think it's going to happen. What about you, John?
Yeah, I do think it's probably going to happen. As you mentioned, there continues to be this big buildup of military assets in the region. Also, Americans and Europeans are being instructed to leave the area before it's too late. I suppose it could all be a bluff in hopes of getting, I guess it would be what I think would end up being like an Obama-esque nuclear weapons deal, which wouldn't be worth the paper it's written on. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think we will see a military operation, perhaps even a sustained one. I was hoping there would be one of these during all the protests a few weeks ago in Iran. Trump said he would have the Iranian peoples back at that time, but he didn't. The help didn't come, and tens of thousands of Iranians ended up being killed by the regime. That's an estimate. But I think it is probably coming now, and I think we could even see Iran's regime toppled and the Ayatollah removed from power. That would be a very good thing, in my view, for the Iranian people, the Middle East, and the free world. And the timing is still relatively good, between the damage that Israel has done, both to with the help of the United States, to Iran's terror networks and to Iran's nuclear program. It set it back a long time, although there's now some conflicting reports, including from the administration, on this. But I got to believe those bombs did significant damage. And there's also this sense of revolution still in the air from the Iranian people. So I think this is sort of a historic opportunity. We've talked years about how other presidencies didn't rise to the occasion on Iran. So many things have fallen in place under this second Trump term that I think we really are at a historic opportunity. We could botch this, or we could go with it, and I think we're probably going to go with it.
I think what Donald Trump, big picture, has in mind is that Venezuela is no longer directly run anyway, by a brutal dictator. Who knows what is in power now in Venezuela, but it's not Maduro.
Right.
If he somehow gets the dictators out of Cuba, and the people, I don't think the people are going to stand up to the dictator because they know nothing else. That's their way of life. It's not like Iran where they've had freedom in their DNA. And if he gets the mullahs out of Iran, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, turning those three countries into something resembling democracies.
Right.
But that CNN poll that I cited a while ago, only 2% of the American people want in foreign policy to be their top issue. I'm not sure that anything short of getting the mullahs out of power and as I say, turning Iran into something resembling a democracy, or giving power to the people in the streets, anything short of that, I'm not sure that's going to register much with the American people.
You might be right, and that brings up a good point too, because we do look like we're on the precipice of this big military operation, and there really hasn't been a lot of time spent from this administration on trying to bring the American people along on this and sell them on the importance of this. That's really been the case with a lot of this stuff, with Venezuela too. And so when it finally happens, I think, people who understand the situation, or will come to think, this was good that we did this. But I think average Americans, most Americans don't pay attention to foreign policy anyway. They did a little bit after 9/11 for obvious reasons. We had this attack on our nation, but I don't think people really pay much attention to that. I think it's extremely important. I think Ukraine is a big part of a really big geopolitical situation that every American should be paying close attention to, but they're not. But yeah, foreign policy is extremely important, and Americans are extremely disinterested in it.
I was going to bring up Ukraine. I don't think anybody in this country is losing sleep over what's happening in Ukraine. That's a shame.
Right.
Let's end with this kicker.
Okay.
Cursing is a new thing with the Democratic Party. Now, let's get out of the way the obvious. Donald Trump has dropped F-bombs on live national television. Doesn't get much worse than that. But Democrats, to show their toughness, John, and everybody listening to us, to show their toughness, they're dropping F-bombs, even in well-rehearsed, scripted commercials. There's a woman running for something or other in Chicago, and she's got several voters saying F Donald Trump, and they don't say F Donald Trump, they use the whole word, F Donald Trump, and they have one after another saying that. Why do they do that? Well, we're as tough as those Republicans. We can say F you. And last night at the State of the Union, some people were wearing tags on their outfits that said F ICE. And I think it had the word, or it may have had the word blocked out, but it was, what it was, F ICE. I don't think we're shocked by it anymore. Donald Trump
Right.
is a big reason for that. But it just strikes me as cheap and low. And another example of how America is demeaning itself. Am I being too critical of the Democrats and of Donald Trump for using language like that in public?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you've been saying this a long time, Bernie, I remember you saying, how much you value decorum back, years ago on Fox. But yeah, I mean, obviously Trump started this latest trend. He obviously wasn't the first, president to publicly swear, but he basically blew up decorum that was previously expected from our elected leaders in high office, and those who have defended his rhetoric over the last decade have often done so by saying things like, well, this is how Americans talk. He's talking like a normal guy, and he's talking like a fighter, and we like our fighters. And so a number of Democratic leaders have decided, as you said, that they need to sound like fighters and regular Americans too. And that's why they're doing this. And yeah, it sounds really dumb to me. I think it sounds dumb when Trump does it too. As a traditional conservative, traditional conservatives like me would much prefer our politics be boring and our politicians be boring. We'd rather have our elected leaders act like mature adults and not adolescent posers. And but a lot of Americans prefer, sadly, a lot of these people who are very engaged in politics, they prefer the pro wrestling performative stuff where it's a spectacle. And that's not just true on the right. That's obvious. That's clearly true on the left. That many on the left feel beaten down by Trump, and the Republicans, they didn't think he would ever come back. And so
so they think the way to get even with Trump is to act like Trump. Is that what
yes, fight fire with fire is what they have in mind. Yeah.
All right. And people wonder why I'm considering
being waterboarded,
moving to Guatemala
oh.
and cutting off all contact with American politics. All right. We were all over the map today. I hope you enjoyed it. Not you, John. I know you enjoyed it because
I always enjoy it
because you made a lot of sense.
Oh, thank you.
One of us made a lot of sense anyway. I think it was you. But thank you all for listening, and tell your friends about us, and we'll see you next time.